So, we have an announcement of the very first Nintendo Switch 2 game key card title, which is a first party Nintendo game, and it is Pokémon Picopia. Not closely following the Pokemon series myself, there are a couple of things that I note here first. First of all, it's a $70 title and seems to be positioned as a fairly major release, rather than the smaller digital title I once took it to be, though given the success of Animal Crossing New Horizon and the panoply of other farm sim style games on the Switch, perhaps that shouldn't be a surprise. Also, less surprising but worth zoning in on is that while the Pokemon Company has been publishing in Japan for a long time, there does seem to have been a progressive transition from Nintendo publishing the games up to the early 2000s to the joint publication arrangement we see now, where the Pokemon Company operates in Japan and Nintendo still publishes them internationally. Now, Nintendo obviously has a very heavy stake in the Pokemon Company. It's thought to be a third flat out, although it's often thought to be a lot more than that through indirect means, and the whole issue of ownership is extremely murky and governed not just by financial strictures, but also the high level of respect in which the various parties hold each other. Nevertheless, Pokemon is a franchise Nintendo identifies as one of its big nine franchises. But nevertheless, the Pokemon Company is functionally operationally independent, and this means that fundamentally they could choose to go with a game keycard just like any other third party publisher. The benefits to the third parties remain clear, namely saving the cost of the storage on the card. While in theory, Nintendo, using their weight within the Pokemon Company, could publish onto a card abroad and just offer the key card version in Japan, this wouldn't be a hugely practical option because it would lead to a complicated import and export arrangement, and the costs would be likely even higher for a smaller production run, and it would just cause market confusion. Therefore, it seems like we're setting a precedent here that game key cards are going to be used for at least some Pokemon titles going into the future. This is certainly a tricky one and opens up the prospect of Gen 10 itself, likely in 2026, being a key card game as well. It's one thing for a spin off title to hit the key cards, but this will almost certainly be one of Nintendo's top sellers on Switch 2, even at the very end of its life, and for it not to have any physical form would be, to say the least, alarming. Now, you could interpret Picopia as the canary down the mine here. If the response to Pacopia's keycard is extremely negative, we should be in a position to know this prior to the end of the 2025 to 26 financial year, because the title is releasing on the 5th of March. I would be astonished if we didn't have active discussions within Nintendo about this, although of course we will never be party to those. Of course, if the Pokemon Company is truly operationally independent, you might argue that Nintendo just has to grin and bear it, or else I guess recompense Game Freak and creatures for the costs incurred in the physical game if they feel that strongly about it. This isn't a likely prospect, as it would set a terrible precedent for Nintendo, and after all, they do profit from it just the same. It also makes you wonder whether Nintendo, when they talked about how third parties requested a solution to the problems that led to Game Geek cards, it was actually the Pokemon Company who were as involved as many of their other partners. Now, one salvation for Pokemon Gen 10 may be that as a title surely likely to hit the $80 mark, it might be expected to avoid a game keycard edition because of this higher price and therefore hopefully higher quality. But if this is the case, it might be surprising. GameIndustry.biz reported that publishers were spending around $15 in manufacturing costs for a Switch 2 game card, with key cards being significantly cheaper, though with no specified price. This difference is likely to eat up the entire $10 difference between a $70 Pocopia and a prospective $80 Gen 10, but it's more complicated than that because the retail price includes the retail markup, so actually the costs to Nintendo and the Pokemon Company are likely to be proportionately far higher, or at least they might squeeze retailers to sell at lower margins, which may well be possible given the eternal popularity of the Pokemon games, but may slightly undermine the respect that the retailers have for Nintendo continuing with a physical release strategy. There are also benefits that come with economies of scale, of course. Moving maybe 2 or 3 million copies of Pocopia, judging at least by the levels of success that many Pokemon spin-offs achieve early on is a different order of magnitude from selling 10 or 20 million Pokemon games within the first year or so. It'll be less than Scarlet and Violet unless it's cross-platform for the install-based reasons, but if Switch 2 continues to sell at a pace of around 20 million a year, 8-figure sell-through should be easier in not too distant a future. The question is, of course, whether economies of scale actually apply here. There are obvious efficiencies that you can gain from producing machines where bulk orders of parts drive down prices, and efficiencies in the production process mean that things move faster. Now, does the NAND flash memory benefit from savings in the same way? It's likely that it would do, especially comparing the amounts of product produced for a year one console with the kinds of volumes required for a major run of a mid-generation release, and that might make it a lot easier to avoid game keycards. Still, even if it's a smaller cost, it's still going to be a cost, and if consumers become acclimatized to game keycards, it may be seen as an unnecessary cost for the Pokemon Company to bear. I don't think it's by any means certain that Pokemon Gen 10 will be a game cue card at this point, but I think it's probably at least evens, if not more. If the Pokemon Company have decided to utilize these, Nintendo is unlikely to gainsay them, not least because, as I say, it's against their own financial interests as well. But I would expect a lot of survey work and other data gathering to establish that Picopia hasn't had a negative effect, as Nintendo will want to avoid any such headlines if they can avoid it. The other question raised, of course, is whether first-party Nintendo titles will one day use keycards. While I'm sure it will happen eventually, I really doubt that we'll see this anytime soon from their core titles, because they do spend an enormous amount of time and treasure on compression. I suspect, though, that when Nintendo is acting as the publisher themselves, rather than the developer, as they were for Octopath Traveler and Triangle Strategy, for example, we are far more likely to see first-party game key cards being used. Let's put some numbers to all this then. Again, don't take this as sourced from some kind of deep level maths, it's just my judgment at the current time, and it's used to help me stay accountable. But I would say there is a 50% chance at this point that Generation 10 of Pokemon is a game key card title. This obviously incorporates both possibilities that Gen 10 will be a Switch 2 exclusive and that there will be a Switch 1 compatible version in at least some form. I think any kind of dual release, which seems unlikely given the early adoption numbers, but Game Freak does like a mature install base, would make a game keycard option far less likely. Assuming it's Switch 2 exclusive though, economies of scale for this game and the likely economies of scale for Gen 11 after that mean that it should be possible to release without the controversy of a game keycard, but I would probably bet on a game keycard release as the likelier option, I'm afraid. As for Nintendo doing a game card release of a game they have developed as opposed to simply publishing, I'd still say this is only a 10% chance by the end of 2026. Obviously, Pokemon is in quite a unique situation, but I can't see any reason why they would want to make the leap at this stage, given that they are trying to promote their own retail strategies. Do let me know, though, what you think below. Check out Patreon for ad-free, early and exclusive content, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.